Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a part of history that's often overlooked, the incredible civilizations that existed in North America long before Columbus ever set foot here. These weren't just scattered tribes, they were thriving societies with advanced cities, rich cultures, and powerful spiritual traditions. So what was life really like in pre-colonial America? Let's uncover the truth. Long before European ships touched American shores, vast civilizations were already flourishing across the continent. These weren't scattered nomadic tribes as often portrayed. They were complex, thriving societies with rich traditions, advanced knowledge, and deep spiritual connections to the land. Picture vast cities like Cahokia, larger than London at the time, with towering mounds, intricate road systems, and bustling trade networks that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. The video opens with a striking visual montage. Aerial shots of ancient ruins, sacred rock carvings, reenacted scenes of ceremonial dances, and maps showing the spread of indigenous cultures long before colonization. As these images unfold, the narrator poses a compelling question. What were Native American civilizations really like before colonization? This introduction sets a tone of reverence and curiosity. It makes clear that this isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey to uncover truths often overlooked or erased. The goal is to invite viewers to look beyond the myths and stereotypes, and to explore the deep legacy of the first Americans, whose stories shaped this land long before it became the United States. Long before the arrival of Europeans, the land now known as North America was anything but empty or primitive. It was a continent alive with civilizations, diverse, complex, and deeply rooted in their environments. Historians and archaeologists estimate that between 50 to 100 million indigenous people lived across the Americas before contact. In North America alone, over 500 distinct tribes thrived, each with its own language, culture, governance, and spiritual worldview. These were not small, isolated groups. Some indigenous nations were massive and highly organized, with population centers that rivaled European cities of the same time. Civilizations like the Mississippians built sprawling cities like Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, home to tens of thousands of people and monumental earthen pyramids. In the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans engineered complex cliff dwellings and sophisticated irrigation systems in arid landscapes. Further north, the Iroquois Confederacy established a model of democratic governance centuries before the U.S. Constitution was written. The continent was divided into major cultural regions, each shaped by geography and natural resources. In the eastern woodlands, dense forests and river systems supported societies like the Powhatan, Lenape, and Haudenosaunee, who lived in longhouses, practiced communal farming, and formed intricate trade networks. On the Great Plains, tribes like the Lakota and Comanche became legendary horse riders, hunting massive herds of buffalo across vast open spaces. Their nomadic lifestyle, however, only developed after the introduction of the horse by the Spanish. In the Southwest, arid deserts challenged communities to adapt ingeniously. The Hopi, Zuni, and Navajo built adobe structures and developed extensive irrigation systems for farming maize, beans, and squash. In contrast, the Pacific Northwest tribes, such as the Tlingit and Haida, relied on the ocean's abundance: salmon, seals, and whales, building cedar plank homes and crafting elaborate totem poles to tell their histories. Farther north in the Arctic, the Inuit people thrived in one of the harshest climates on Earth by mastering the icy terrain. Their knowledge of hunting, clothing, and shelter enabled survival where few others could live. In the southeast, powerful nations like the Cherokee and Creek developed mound-building traditions and complex political systems, while the California tribes utilized acorns as a staple food and lived in relatively egalitarian communities surrounded by rich biodiversity. Each of these cultural regions was a world of its own, shaped by climate, landscape, and centuries of adaptation. But what united all indigenous cultures was a deep spiritual connection to the land, a belief that humans were part of nature, not separate from it. This relationship informed everything, from seasonal migration and hunting rituals to communal decision-making and storytelling. What we're uncovering here isn't just about forgotten history, it's about civilizations that laid foundations, built networks, and developed philosophies long before European influence. This was a land of nations, and their legacy still lives on today. While many still imagine pre-Columbian North America as a vast wilderness scattered with small, simple tribes, the truth is far more astonishing. This was a land of cities, trade networks, monumental architecture, and complex societies. Across the continent, Native American civilizations had already developed their own forms of governance, religion, engineering, and urban planning long before Columbus ever set sail. Cahokia, often overlooked in mainstream narratives, was a testament to the complexity and sophistication of indigenous civilizations in pre-Columbian North America. Situated near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers, the city was ideally placed for trade, agriculture, and cultural exchange. Its strategic location enabled the flourishing of a vibrant urban center that, at its height, rivaled the largest cities in Europe. The scale and planning of Cahokia reveal an organized society with a strong central authority. The city's layout was not haphazard. It was meticulously designed, with wide plazas, residential districts, and ceremonial spaces. Monk's Mound, the largest of the roughly 120 mounds in the area, served as the focal point of both political and religious power. At over 14 acres in size and rising 100 feet above the plain, it would have dominated the landscape, symbolizing the societal hierarchy and the spiritual importance of the site. What's even more remarkable is the astronomical alignment of these mounds. The people of Cahokia built what is now called Woodhenge, a circle of wooden posts that functioned much like Stonehenge in England. These posts aligned with the solstices and equinoxes, indicating that Cahokians were keen observers of celestial events. This knowledge likely guided agricultural cycles, religious festivals, and governance, linking the cosmos to everyday life. Cahokia also boasted a robust economy supported by large-scale farming, particularly the cultivation of maize, which served as the staple of their diet and enabled population growth. Artisans crafted intricate tools, pottery, and ceremonial objects, while traders brought goods from as far away as the Great Lakes and the Gulf Coast. The city's influence extended far beyond its borders, suggesting a powerful and far-reaching network of communication and commerce. Socially, Cahokia likely had a hierarchical structure, with elites residing near the central mounds and commoners spread throughout the surrounding areas. The massive labor required to build the mounds and maintain the city suggests a system capable of mobilizing and organizing thousands of people, a sign of complex governance. Despite its power and influence, Cahokia began to decline around 1300 CE, and by the time Europeans arrived, it had long been abandoned. The reasons for its decline remain debated. Environmental degradation, climate shifts, political unrest, or overpopulation could all have played a role. Still, Cahokia remains a profound reminder that advanced urban indigenous civilizations thrived in North America long before European colonization. Its legacy challenges assumptions about the sophistication of pre-Columbian societies and underscores the deep scientific, political, and spiritual knowledge embedded in indigenous history. Cahokia was far more than just a collection of mounds. It was a highly organized and culturally sophisticated metropolis that embodied a structured urban society. The city was divided into defined neighborhoods, each with its own function and status within the broader civic and ceremonial framework. At the center stood expansive public plazas, likely used for gatherings, rituals, markets, and games, acting as social glue for a diverse and densely populated community. Ceremonial complexes were integral to Cahokian life, and their design reflected a worldview deeply rooted in cosmology. Monk's Mound, at the heart of the complex, served as both a religious and political center. Here, elites likely lived and conducted rituals that emphasized their divine or semi-divine status. The spatial arrangement of mounds and plazas wasn't arbitrary. It reflected a carefully constructed social order and a belief system that connected the city's layout to celestial patterns and agricultural cycles. Social stratification was clearly visible in the city's geography. The elite class resided atop man-made mounds, physically elevated above the surrounding population. These mounds symbolized not only power and prestige, but also access to the spiritual realm. Meanwhile, commoners inhabited the outer areas of the city, living in wooden houses arranged in organized neighborhoods. This deliberate urban planning reinforced the social hierarchy and facilitated control over the city's large population. Cahokia's reach extended far beyond the Mississippi Valley. It sat at the center of a sprawling trade network that stretched thousands of miles in all directions. Artifacts found at Cahokia, including marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, and obsidian from the Rockies, demonstrate a vibrant economy and cultural exchange that connected distant regions of the continent. These goods weren't just economic, they held symbolic and ritual value, often used in elite burials and religious ceremonies. Religion played a central role in maintaining Cahokia's power structure. The city's rulers were likely seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, and religious ceremonies reinforced their legitimacy. These rituals often revolved around solar events and agricultural fertility, emphasizing the cyclical nature of life and the sacred responsibility of the elite to ensure prosperity. Structures like Woodhenge, which aligned with solstices and equinoxes, show how religious observance was tightly interwoven with both governance and daily life. Altogether, Cahokia represented a thriving, complex civilization, urban, hierarchical, and spiritually rich. It challenges outdated notions that indigenous societies in North America were uniformly small-scale or unsophisticated. Instead, Cahokia stands as a powerful reminder of the innovation, connectivity, and cultural depth of Native American civilizations long before European contact. To the southwest, in today's Four Corners region, the ancestral Puebloans were constructing incredible feats of engineering in one of North America's harshest environments. Their cities, yes, cities, rose in places like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. Multi-story stone dwellings were carved directly into cliffs, offering both protection and efficient use of space. At Chaco Canyon, massive stone complexes known as great houses were aligned with precise astronomical markers. Sunlight would shine directly through specific doorways or windows on solstices and equinoxes. These communities developed intricate irrigation systems to farm in the desert, channeling scarce water to support agriculture. Corn, beans, and squash, known as the Three Sisters, were staples. But beyond farming and architecture, they created a sophisticated culture of astronomy, art, and long-distance trade. Turquoise, obsidian, feathers, and even cacao from Mesoamerica have been found in these ancient sites, proving just how connected these people were. Moving eastward, another impressive example of social and political sophistication emerges: the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as the Haudenosaunee. This was a powerful alliance of 6 nations: the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and later the Tuscarora. Long before the United States drafted its constitution, the Iroquois had already formed a model of democratic governance. Each nation maintained its own autonomy, but made decisions together through a grand council where clan leaders, or sachems, represented their people. Their system emphasized balance, consensus, and peace. In fact, many historians believe that elements of the Iroquois political system, particularly its emphasis on federalism and checks and balances, influenced the framers of the U.S. Constitution. Beyond politics, the Iroquois were known for their longhouses, sophisticated agricultural practices, and powerful oratory traditions. These were not people on the fringe of civilization. These were civilizations, urban, organized, intelligent, and deeply spiritual. They understood astronomy and architecture, engineered irrigation systems, governed through alliances and councils, and built cities that lasted for centuries. And yet, their stories are often overlooked or forgotten, reduced to footnotes in history books. But as we dig deeper into the past, the narrative is clear. North America was home to remarkable indigenous civilizations long before Europeans arrived. Their legacy is not only in the ruins left behind, but in the ideas, systems, and cultural values that continue to echo today. Long before highways and internet cables connected the world, Native American civilizations had already built intricate and far-reaching networks of exchange. Trade wasn't just about goods. It was about relationships, knowledge, and culture. These networks stretched across thousands of miles, weaving together tribes and nations from the Arctic to the Caribbean. Long before the arrival of Europeans, North America was already crisscrossed by vast trade networks that rivaled those of the ancient Old World. From the Pacific Northwest to the Gulf Coast, indigenous peoples developed extensive systems of commerce, using rivers, foot trails, and overland routes as their highways. These pathways weren't just for the exchange of goods. They were conduits for culture, innovation, and diplomacy. Trade goods moved across immense distances, forming a web of connection that linked diverse ecological zones and cultural groups. Shells from the Atlantic coast were highly prized inland, often used for ornamentation, ceremonial regalia, or as i.e., symbolic currency. Obsidian, a sharp volcanic glass from the Rocky Mountains, traveled eastward where it was fashioned into tools and weapons. Copper from the Great Lakes was hammered into intricate shapes and used in spiritual rites. Turquoise, from the Southwest, had both aesthetic and ritual significance, frequently appearing in jewelry and ceremonial items. Even more astonishing were the vibrant feathers of macaws and the cacao beans from Mesoamerica, which made their way into the North American interior, signaling contact with complex civilizations like the Maya. These goods held far more than material value. They were often deeply embedded in the spiritual and mythological systems of the tribes who received them. Feathers, stones, and shells were not merely decorative, they were alive with meaning. They were used in burial rites, ceremonies, and the construction of sacred objects, helping to reinforce the social and religious order of each community. A single object could serve as a link between worlds, physical and spiritual, distant and local, past and present. The people who carried these goods, traders, were more than just merchants. They were also cultural ambassadors and storytellers. As they moved from one community to another, they brought with them not just materials, but also songs, languages, technologies, and cosmologies. Through this human network, ideas spread: agricultural techniques, artistic styles, religious beliefs, and political systems. A person living in the Mississippi Valley might never have met someone from the deserts of the Southwest or the rainforests of Mesoamerica, yet their lives were interconnected through these trade relationships. This pan-continental exchange system challenges the notion that pre-Columbian North America was isolated or fragmented. In reality, indigenous peoples had developed a sophisticated, dynamic, continent-wide network that fostered innovation and mutual influence. It was a living web of human activity and cultural evolution, proof of the deep interconnectedness of Native American societies long before the arrival of Europeans. Alongside trade, Native Americans developed innovative agricultural systems, uniquely adapted to their environments. One of the most iconic examples is the cultivation of the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. This trio wasn't chosen at random. It's a brilliant example of companion planting. Corn provides a natural trellis for the beans to climb, beans fix nitrogen in the soil to nourish all three crops, and squash spreads out across the ground, acting as a living mulch to prevent weeds and retain moisture. This wasn't just farming. It was sustainable engineering, passed down through generations of trial, observation, and spiritual reverence. In the desert Southwest, Pueblo societies built complex irrigation canals to support agriculture in arid climates. In the Northeast, forest gardening integrated edible and medicinal plants into the natural ecosystem. And in places like the Mississippi Delta, floodplain farming thrived, taking advantage of seasonal rhythms to nourish the soil naturally. These practices weren't separate from culture, they were deeply intertwined with belief systems and ways of life. Native American spirituality was rooted in a profound respect for the land, viewing it not as property to be owned, but as a living entity to be cared for. Every mountain, river, and stone had spirit. Sacred sites dotted the continent, places of pilgrimage, prayer, and power. Some aligned with celestial movements, others tied to myths that stretched back centuries. And then there were the stories. In the absence of written records, oral traditions held entire cosmologies, histories, and moral codes. Elders were the libraries. Through storytelling, tribes passed down lessons of survival, justice, love, and reverence for nature. These weren't just bedtime tales. They were educational, political, and spiritual narratives that shaped entire generations. Drumming, dance, art, and ceremony weren't considered entertainment. They were acts of connection. Music carried Messages. Symbols etched into pottery or woven into textiles told stories of ancestors, battles, migrations, and visions. Even the designs on a piece of beadwork could serve as a code, readable by those who knew its language. In every corner of the continent, from the icy Arctic to the sun-baked Southwest, innovation wasn't driven by domination. It was guided by balance. Harmony with the earth, respect for other communities, and a deep understanding of the natural world defined Native American culture. Their legacy isn't just preserved in museums or ancient ruins. It lives on in traditions, languages, and the very land beneath our feet. These were not primitive peoples lost in time. They were complex societies of philosophers, scientists, engineers, artists, and spiritual leaders. And the more we look, the more we realize that the roots of American innovation run much deeper than we've been taught. For centuries, popular history has painted a narrow picture of Native American civilizations, often either romanticized as peaceful nature dwellers or dismissed as primitive societies. But both extremes miss the truth. The reality is far more complex, rich, and human. Let's start with one of the most enduring myths: that Native Americans were primitive. This stereotype, rooted in colonial propaganda, ignored the towering achievements of indigenous peoples. These were not scattered tribes of simple hunters and gatherers. Many lived in urban centers with complex infrastructure, scientific knowledge, and advanced governance systems. Take the Mississippian city of Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis. At its peak, it was larger than London, with more than 20,000 residents. Its massive earthen mounds, some over 100 feet tall, required organized labor, advanced engineering, and long-term planning. Its layout reveals astronomical alignment, suggesting a deep understanding of celestial cycles. Or look to the Puebloan societies of the Southwest, whose cliffside dwellings at Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon defy imagination. These structures weren't random. Walls were oriented to track solstices and equinoxes. They created observatories in stone. Their irrigation systems diverted scarce desert water with surgical precision. Then there's medicine. Indigenous healers understood herbal remedies that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. From willow bark, a natural source of aspirin, to tobacco used in sacred and medicinal contexts, they cultivated pharmacies from forests and fields. And their understanding of mental, spiritual, and physical health was deeply holistic, something Western medicine is only now re-exploring. Now flip the coin to the opposite myth, that Native societies were a peaceful utopia, free of conflict or political tension. Again, not true. Like all human civilizations, indigenous nations experienced war, alliances, rivalries, and power struggles. The Iroquois Confederacy itself, one of the most sophisticated political systems in pre-colonial America, was born from an effort to end intertribal warfare and build unity. But they didn't abolish conflict. They managed it through law, diplomacy, and structure. Some tribes raided others for resources or captives, while others maintained peaceful trade and shared ceremonies. There were confederacies, rivalries, and treaties, just like in ancient Rome, feudal Europe, or dynastic China. Warfare among indigenous peoples in pre-Columbian North America was indeed a reality, but it was shaped by complex cultural, spiritual, and social systems that bore little resemblance to the modern idea of total or indiscriminate war. Conflicts were often ritualized, governed by traditional codes of conduct that emphasized honor, reciprocity, and often included mechanisms for resolution and reconciliation. Raids might be aimed at restoring balance after an offense, acquiring prestige, or fulfilling spiritual duties, not merely conquest or destruction. For many societies, warfare was deeply symbolic. It could involve specific rituals before and after battle, purification ceremonies, and diplomatic channels through which hostilities could be ended without prolonged bloodshed. Warriors were not simply fighters. They were often respected community members with ceremonial roles, and their actions in war were embedded in broader cultural narratives about balance, justice, and spiritual duty. But to reduce indigenous civilizations to either noble peacekeepers or bloodthirsty warriors is to fall into simplistic myths, both of which rob these societies of their full humanity. The truth is far more profound and far more relatable. These were dynamic, diverse civilizations composed of people with ambitions, fears, beliefs, and systems of governance. They formed cities, traded over thousands of miles, conducted scientific observations, engineered agricultural systems, debated moral and political ideas, and passed down rich oral histories filled with meaning and complexity. Some built monumental architecture aligned to the stars. Others navigated dense forests or vast deserts using intricate environmental knowledge. They built empires like the Mississippian mound builders, the Puebloan cliff dwellers, and countless other societies whose legacies still echo in modern native cultures today. They formed confederacies and diplomatic alliances, like the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois Confederacy, whose principles of governance would influence the framers of the U.S. Constitution. These civilizations were not frozen in time. They evolved, adapted to climate changes, restructured in response to internal shifts, and responded to external pressures with creativity and resilience. The real story isn't one of polar extremes. It's a human story, full of struggle and brilliance, cruelty and compassion, conflict and cooperation. It's time to move past the outdated myths, the ones that paint Indigenous people as either utopian guardians of nature or chaotic primitive tribes. Instead, we must meet them where they stood, as human beings, rich in culture, intellect, and spirit, with nuance, with humility, and above all with awe for what they accomplished, endured, and continue to contribute to the story of humanity. As the sun set on the 15th century, the Americas were anything but a new world. They were ancient, thriving continents teeming with culture, innovation, and life. Millions of Native Americans lived in complex societies, some urban, some nomadic, each deeply adapted to their environment and connected by intricate networks of trade, diplomacy, and shared stories. On the eve of contact, these civilizations were in motion. Tribes formed alliances, settled disputes, traded with neighbors across vast distances, and shaped the land through fire, farming, and architecture. From the towering mounds of Cahokia to the vast irrigation systems of the Hohokam, this was a world in balance, changing, growing, and innovating in its own rhythm. But that rhythm was about to be disrupted. Long before Columbus ever set sail, there were earlier contacts, fleeting but real. Norse explorers from Greenland made it to the northern coasts of North America. In places like Newfoundland, they met the Inuit and the Beothuk. These early interactions were often short-lived and tense, sometimes violent. Still, they offered a preview of what would come. When European ships began appearing more frequently along the shores of the Americas in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, they brought with them not just new technologies and ambitions, but a cascade of change that would forever reshape the continent. Spanish expeditions led by figures like Columbus, Cortez, and De Soto didn't just stumble upon empty wilderness. They encountered vast, organized indigenous civilizations with their own histories, hierarchies, and worldviews. In the Caribbean, native Taino and Arawak peoples were among the first to experience contact. What began with curiosity and cautious interaction quickly turned to exploitation, forced labor, and population collapse due to disease and violence. The Spanish then pushed into the mainland, into regions like present-day Florida, the American Southeast, and the Southwest, meeting powerful native nations along the way. These encounters weren't one-sided. Indigenous groups had their own strategies for navigating these strange new arrivals. Some resisted outright, choosing battle over submission. Others saw opportunity in alliance, leveraging relationships with Europeans to gain power over rival tribes. In some regions, native nations tried to incorporate European goods and knowledge into their own systems, adapting and responding with remarkable resilience and creativity. Yet even for those who allied or accommodated, the consequences were often devastating. European-introduced diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza spread rapidly, often faster than the explorers themselves, wiping out entire communities that had no prior exposure or immunity. Within a generation, millions of indigenous people had died, not just from conflict but from biological catastrophe. Still, it's important to understand these first contacts as moments of complexity, not just of conquest. There was mutual curiosity, misunderstanding, negotiation, and cultural exchange. European chroniclers wrote of awe at the cities, roads, and governance of native societies. Native leaders, in turn, assessed the newcomers with caution, wonder, and often skepticism. This early period of contact set the tone for centuries of change. It introduced new power dynamics, new trade opportunities, and new threats. It wasn't a single story of invasion, but many overlapping stories of adaptation, resistance, and transformation. Native societies weren't passive recipients of European influence. They were active participants in shaping the outcomes, even as the scale of disruption grew. In those first uncertain decades, as ships appeared on the horizon and strange languages filled the air, the Americas stood at a crossroads, one where old worlds collided and new ones began to form. But it wasn't muskets or swords that delivered the most devastating blow. It was microbes. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza spread, like wildfire, wiping out entire communities. In some regions, up to 90% of native populations vanished within a generation. These were societies that had never been exposed to Old World illnesses. No immunity, no defense. Entire cultures were altered before direct contact had even occurred, as epidemics traveled ahead of explorers through trade routes and migration paths. Alongside disease came horses, metal tools, glass beads, and guns, items that reshaped economies and power dynamics. Some tribes used European trade goods to gain an edge over rivals. Others were forced into dependence on foreign goods. The old ways were not forgotten, but they were challenged. This wasn't just the arrival of strangers, it was the turning point of an entire era. The landscape of North America began to shift. Tribal borders were redrawn, long-held alliances frayed or deepened, and a new era of survival began. Some indigenous nations resisted, some adapted. All were forever changed. What happened next would alter the course of history, not just for Native Americans, but for the entire world. As we reflect on what we've uncovered, one truth becomes clear. Native America was never an empty wilderness waiting to be discovered. It was already a vibrant, dynamic world, a world of cities and sacred sites, of scholars and storytellers, of engineers, astronomers, and leaders. It was home to millions who lived in balance with the land, who shaped it and were shaped by it. These were not primitive societies, they were advanced, diverse civilizations with rich cultures, complex governments, and vast networks that connected thousands of miles of territory. And yet, so much of this history has been overlooked, misrepresented, or erased. Today, we stand at a turning point, not unlike the one centuries ago. A moment to listen, to learn, and to honor the stories that came before. Because the story of Native America is not just a footnote in the past, it is a vital chapter in the story of all of us. And this is just the beginning. In the next video, we'll explore what happened after first contact, how colonization reshaped Indigenous life, and how Native nations survived, resisted, and endure to this day. Their story didn't end, it continues. If you found this journey powerful, share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Thanks for watching.